let everyone in.
Very cool.
As long as you can see me.
Yeah.
And
And
I'm
then
still,
hopefully people will be here shortly.
right, and I'm
Now I'm
still
going to turn
screen-
off my camera and my mic, and
That's fine. You can, I'll call you, Bob. You can still hear me in case we need you, but
yes,
I'll be
I'll be lurking in the background if you need me.
wonderful.
Okay.
Thank you, Bob. And Tanisha, we'll just give it a second. I see that people are coming in here, and we'll give it a minute till everybody has safely logged on to Zoom. They have been waiting in the waiting room. Several of them had notified me they would be on the YouTube live streaming here. So we'll just give it one little minute, and we're, I think, like 2 minutes after the hour here.
Okay. And you can also see the screen, right?
Yes.
Okay,
yes,
just making sure.
absolutely. And we'll keep it safely like this. I think everybody can see that now. And I'd say we would start. So welcome everyone in Stuttgart, Germany, and here in St. Louis. Welcome to this virtual lecture series. And before we officially start, I would like to walk everyone through our technical setup here today. This lecture will be recorded, and a link to this recording will be provided afterwards on our UMSL global website. And UMSL, UMSL, you see that here in my little box. UMSL is pronounced UMSL, the University of Missouri, St. Louis. Our Zoom settings for today are as follows. So during the presentation, all our guests will remain muted. This means our audience cannot switch on their microphones, and also faces visible on your screen will be just the speakers and your own face if you happen to switch on your own camera, if this is your first time using Zoom. In other words, this time guests will not be able to see each other. Everyone will be able to submit questions at any point of time during this presentation. And please feel free and very much invited to share your names and organization in the chat box, which you find on the bottom of our screen here if you're using Zoom right now. Next to the chat box, also on the bottom, so auf der unteren Menüleiste auf Ihrem Bildschirm ganz unten, sehen Sie einen Q&A button. So you will find the Q&A button on the bottom of your screen, and please use the Q&A button for submitting your questions. As for time, we plan on about 30 to 40 minutes of presentation today, followed by a question and answer session. We plan to wrap it up around 7:30 in Stuttgart or elsewhere in Germany, and at 12:30 here local time in St. Louis. On behalf of the University of Missouri St. Louis, I would like to take the opportunity to thank the city of Stuttgart for their generous sponsorship of this lecture series as part of our sister cities anniversary celebrations, 60 years of Stuttgart and St. Louis. That's a long time, and it has been a very happy time. I would like to thank our sister city committees on both sides of the Atlantic, as much as I would like to acknowledge the support of the German Culture Center at our university and of the DAZ, the Deutsch-Amerikanische Zentrum in Stuttgart as well. My name is Liane Konstantin. I'm the acting executive director of the UMSL Global Office here at the University of St. Louis. Which is the international office of our university. Today, I'm also here as the representative of our Stuttgart-St. Louis Sister City Board that has been strongly involved in making our 60th anniversary of the city partnerships a year-long event of exchange celebrations. So as you might notice, I'm originally from Germany. I've worked for the German government and the DAD before moving to the United States 8 years ago. And I have been with UMSL, with my university, for almost 4 years, actually exactly 4 years now. We are a public research university, and for our German guests tonight, it might be important to know that the large public research institutions in the United States oftentimes see a relatively high percentage of so-called minority students, which is the term to use to describe students of color. In this series of our event, you have seen how this is important to us. And today I will serve as your moderator and if at all needed, as your cultural translator during the Q&A session. This lecture series on race and racism is the result of an invitation of the city of Stuttgart looking to facilitate a transatlantic discussion steered by academic and career experts in this field. Our university has welcomed this opportunity, and we are excited about this lecture series. We have been excited for 3 months now, which intends to provide lots of opportunity for questions, discussion, and intercultural learning. It is my great pleasure today to introduce today's speaker to you, Dr. Tanisha Stevens. Dr. Tanisha Stevens is our university's Vice Chancellor for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. She's also the first Vice Chancellor in this role. So Dr. Tanisha Stevens earned her bachelor's degree with honors in psychology, her master's in counseling, and her doctorate degree in educational leadership and policy studies. Dr. Stevens works closely with all key stakeholders, faculty, staff, students, alumni, campus leaders, and community partners to enhance the university's commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion. And these are big words, and I'm sure we'll learn all the details of the deeper meanings of that, Tanisha, right?
Yes.
So Tanisha basically works with literally everyone on campus, and I honestly don't know anyone who does not know Tanisha. This very fact speaks volumes of her commitment, success, and joy of building very important partnerships, and for being very well respected for her and her office's work. Recently, Dr. Stevens created a conversation series called UMSL's Com-Unity. So com and then unity spelled all in capital letters. I'm sure you'll hit on that a little bit, Tanisha. A series of facilitated panel discussions designed to raise awareness and to provide continued dialogue from diverse perspectives. The first panel discussions called Virtual Gatherings for Racial Unity occurred in June 2020 after the death of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and Ahmaud Arbery. It allowed over 200 individuals from the campus community to come together in order to share, process, and listen collectively. Tanisha, you have offered so many more community events and workshops, but I thought I picked this particular series as the same spirit actually ignited the idea of our Stuttgart friends to turn to us for those conversations that we're holding here today about race and racism. And with this, I think it's time to hand over to you with pleasure, and the floor is yours.
Thank you. Good morning, good evening to those as well. And thank you for taking the time out to be with us today as we have another conversation, a continued conversation as it relates to the role of the Office of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion at American University and why that's more relevant now than ever. And so I wanted to begin by providing just an agenda for our discussion today and really share an overview of what the Office of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion entails here at the university, as well as discuss the history of diversity work in higher education and how that evolution of diversity work really led to the emergence of the Chief Diversity Officer, commonly referred to as a CDO. Or in some instances, an A for AFODO for the Academic Diversity Officer. And there's some conversation in regards to that terminology as well that we'll share later in the presentation. And then for the remainder of our time together, really want to discuss why Chief Diversity Officers and diversity offices in higher education are really important, why they're more relevant now in the current context that we find our institutions in, as well as the challenges that sometimes are faced in this space. And so then at the conclusion of our conversation, really want to open up the presentation to any questions that you, the audience, may have. And so I always state that although the question and answer is at the end of the presentation, I welcome questions, comments, points of clarification throughout the presentation. And so I'll monitor the chat, and I believe Leanne will monitor the chat as well to answer any questions that you may have. Okay, so we'll get started. And just before we get started, there'll be a lot of clicking and looking. So this is new, what we learned through this virtual environment. This is new for many of us. And so we're very thankful for those that are patient with us as we go through this process. So I first wanted to start the conversation by telling you a little bit about myself and then this role. As Leanne indicated, I am the first Vice Chancellor for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion at the university. I've been at the institution for over 17 years. I previously served as our director of our Office of Academic Integrity, and that really was that student misconduct investigation of cases of students who found themselves in situations that really needed a conversation about the importance of integrity and the work that they do. And so I began in that role and then moved into the interim director role for the office in November of 2019. Our previous director had been at the institution and at the University of Missouri system for over 30 years. And so it was my honor to step into that interim position and really build upon the legacy that she had and the foundation that she had created in her work here. And then later in July of 2020 of this year, it feels like it's been a year already, stepped into this Vice Chancellor role for the university. And so when I have these conversations and really understanding the role of our office here on campus and the role that I play at the university and the importance of sharing that is really someone in this role needs to be very important in building relationships, to be authentic, transparent, to lead with integrity, even when the conversations and the decisions that we are making as an institution are difficult, even when they make us uncomfortable in having those conversations. And really this position and those in this role who do the diversity work, really sometimes you challenge even your own thinking in your own preconceived ideals. And so it's not uncommon in this work to hear individuals stress the importance of being aware of your own implicit bias. And that's some of the terminology that we'll hear throughout the presentation, but implicit bias really is our own attitudes, our own stereotypes that even affect, even in our best interest of helping others, affect our understanding, our actions, and our decisions when we're having these conversations in oftentimes unconscious manners. And so this is important in order to do the work that is required to address the diversity, equity, and inclusion needs of the campus. We always have to take a self-inventory in our space. And I think for me, what has been helpful is even being authentic in that. It's okay to say, this is information or this is a topic that is new to me. Help me in understanding this. So collectively, we'll move the institution forward. And so I included this quote here from Angela Davis. And I think this really speaks to me. The more conversations, the more interactions, the more opportunities to share with others the work that we do. And it's, I am no longer accepting the things I cannot change. I am changing the things I cannot accept. And that is why this work is important, more relevant now in the context that we face ourselves in. So it's really important for me to expand and deepen discussion. So I thank Leanne, I think UMSL Global, I thank others for giving me the opportunity to come in and have this conversation. because sometimes we call them difficult conversations, but I would challenge that and say they're necessary conversations about race, about class, about ableism, about gender inequalities and the roles that we play in those conversations. And it's really important not only just to have the conversation, but to work collectively on the next steps. What are the actions? What are our initiatives? And sometimes that's anything from a professional development, training opportunities, to really even looking outside of the institution and really building and honing in on some of our internal and external partnerships. So I believe that's important as well. And so the office, so when you're asking what exactly is an Office of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, what is a diversity office? And so I've listed the mission of our office here, and really the Office of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, or diversity offices, really support the leadership and the strategic goals and missions of the institution. And how do we do that? Really by providing that support, by being the leaders, by being part of the decision-making on initiatives that really move and support our campus community, and actions that really promote diversity, equity, inclusion, and social justice. And so the office also, the other side of that, which is unique for our office, and when you look at different offices of diversity, there are some that have a compliance piece, and our office is one of those. And I'll talk a little bit about what that looks like, but really ensuring that the university stays in compliance with our federal, state, and local equal opportunity laws and regulations as well. And so I put this picture at the bottom because when we talk about the University of Missouri St. Louis, it is among one of the most culturally and ethnically diverse institutions in Missouri. And so for me, the level of commitment and dedication that this campus demonstrates has been tremendous. This work began before I stepped into this role, but I'm proud of the work that has and will continue to be accomplished here at UMSL. And so as a result of our efforts, the Insight into Diversity magazine named UMSL as one of 90 recipients, and this is colleges and universities across the United States, of its prestigious 2020 Higher Education Excellence in Diversity Award. This award is a national honor, and it really demonstrates our outstanding commitment to diversity and inclusion. And what, in addition to the great work that we do, our also point of pride is that we were the only institution in Missouri to receive this award this year. So when I have conversations with others, that is a credit to the work that takes place on this campus. And so that is something that should be celebrated. And so any opportunity that we have to share that, I tell others to make sure that that is shared, because that is an accomplishment in itself. So we're fortunate to be a recipient. And so in this new role, as I stated, the Vice Chancellor, the Chancellor's commitment and dedication and purpose in elevating this position from a director to a Vice Chancellor gave us the opportunity to also be very creative and innovative. Myself and others were relatively new and very small but mighty units. Myself, I came into this role in November of 2019, and our Director of Strategic Diversity Initiatives, Manager of Strategic Diversity Initiatives, Dr. Marlo Goldstein-Holt, came in December. So I took the interim role in November. She came in December, and then our Title IX office actually moved under our office in July. So I tell people we're strong, but we're small but mighty. And the office is really highlighted by 3 focus areas, and that is our professional development and diversity initiatives, our Title IX, and a new initiative that we hope COVID pushed us back a little bit, but the conversation's still there in regards to our cultural center. So the next few slides, I'll share those 3 focus areas. So for us, in order to build a welcoming and inclusive campus community and to fulfill our educational and strategic missions as a global university, the campus community, from our students, from our faculty, from our staff, really must have the awareness and the knowledge and the skills to work effectively with diverse populations. And so in order for us to support this initiative, Dr. Marlo Goldstein Hold really, through her leadership, has really transformed the professional development opportunities at the university. And so we're very fortunate to have her in this space. And so what I wanted to just share just briefly is, as we look into the spring semester, just some of the areas of conversation, just a glimpse of some of the topics and discussions that are taking place on our campus. And so our professional development offerings include anything from our anti-racism learning and dialogue series, which is going to be our year-long series for faculty and staff to have those facilitated conversations to really increase racial literacy and develop an anti-racism framework and practice, to our constructive communication across differences series, which really is going to enhance the ability for us to engage in conversations that are challenging, sometimes emotionally focused conversation, and utilize those skills when we're interacting with other coworkers, for faculty in the classroom with students, and even in communication from students within students, really building upon those interpersonal contacts. And to our Diversity 101, which is our larger foundational course. This semester, we were able to provide different options because when we were all physically on campus, we realized that not everyone was able to take that time out to come in. So Marlo was really conscious about that and provided different options for individuals to be able to take the Diversity 101 course online. So those are just a few examples of really our facilitated educational opportunities that we provide from our office to the campus. And so the second emphasis area really is our Title IX emphasis area, and that is under the leadership of our Title IX and Chief Equity Officer, Dana Petit Daniels, and our Deputy Title IX Coordinator and Investigator, who is Jessica Sordersky. And the office really is responsible for investigating any equity-based concerns, whether that's gender inequalities, whether that is discriminatory action in the workplace, to our Title IX cases. And so I know Title IX, I wanted to provide just a little bit more about Title IX because that may be unfamiliar to some. But Title IX really is a federal regulation that prohibits sex discrimination, sexual harassment, sexual misconduct on college campuses as well as in the workforce, because ultimately, in these spaces, individuals should have the opportunity to live, to work, to be educated in an environment that is free from discrimination and from hostility. So Title IX really speaks to that. And like I stated, that office was previously under human resources, but we realized in order to really centralize our equity processes, that it was important that the Title IX office was housed under the Office of Diversity, Equity being Title IX, and Inclusion. And so then we're really excited about the Cultural Center. It went from conversations on campus back in 2018 with a very dedicated group of individuals who really were assessing the needs of the campus. And so now that the Cultural Center will report to our office, it really was designed to look at actions to recruit and retain our student population, our faculty, as well as staff, and really promote civil discourse through conversations, as well as sustainable dialogue in our inclusive environment. And so I look forward to the day that we'll have the ribbon cutting of our Cultural Center. And if the opportunity presents itself, if it's still remotely Zoom, that we'll be able to share that as well. But the center really will provide a welcoming space in order to advance our diversity initiatives, our research, and really our community engagement focus, which is very important in this role. And so this is just some ideas and some programming and initiatives that we as a unit have been discussing with other campus partners, including student involvement, women and gender studies, and others about what this cultural center can look like. So I welcome those continued conversations, and I welcome the day that we're able to open the doors and really create and really begin the action of the conversations that we've had. And so also important in this role, and Leanne spoke a little bit about this also earlier when she described our virtual gathering for racial unity. So it's really important that we create a space for the campus community to have conversations. And the office could not do this without the support and the collaboration of others. So on this slide, really what I wanted to share with you was just a number of the conversations that we have had actually since July. So these are just conversations within the last 6 months from our office. And those series really have been a collaborative effort and really are designed to raise awareness and provide that continued dialogue from diverse perspectives. And as you can see, those conversations centered around race, intersectionality of identities, love without bias, systems of oppression such as voter suppression, which was really important conversations to have. If you've been watching the election results and the history of the election, I am glad that our conversation is after the election than before. Because we're sitting in a different space. But that was also important to looking at cultural empowerment, social justice, and those are just to name a few. We look forward to some new ideas that will take place in the spring, including some conversations with our Anti-Defamation League and bringing those conversations to the campus. So we are fortunate, and we have what the virtual environment has provided to us is the opportunity for others who may not have been able to attend those conversations to really have the opportunity to come and be a part. So we're grateful. Although we would like to see each other in person, this virtual space does have its benefits as well. Take a break. Are there any questions? Are we good? Okay. And so, so I just wanted to thank you for allowing me to share just some of the work of our office. It's really important. I believe that it will frame the remainder of our conversation for the next few moments. And so what was interesting to me is once I was afforded an opportunity to do an interview, and the interviewer asked me, what is the typical day of a chief diversity officer? What does that look like? And so this was my response. There is no typical day. There is no typical responsibility. And the reason I say this is, for example, individuals in diversity spaces could be planning a panel discussion on race or race and racism discussion with Also Global, and in the next moment find themselves conducting a large scale investigation about equity-based concerns. And so I tell individuals, you have to be flexible in this space. We go in and we're thinking about the great things that we want to do, the great conversations, the great dialogues that we want to have for others. But if an equity concern knocks at our door, we have to be attentive to addressing the needs of our campus community, even if that means putting something not on the back burner, but just taking it down off the shelf for that moment and then focusing back on it. So what I also say for those in this space is this responsibility is not unique, but really it demonstrates the importance of the work that we do for a university, work that should not be diminished. And it also highlights that when we talk about DEI, which is diversity, equity, and inclusion work, that work encompasses the D, which is promoting diversity, ensuring equitable treatment, and inclusion of all in the conversations. And I tell individuals that not one aspect of this work is more important than another. Okay. So chief diversity officers or academic diversity officers, what exactly does that terminology mean? And so when I'm having a conversation, I tell individuals that over the last few years, the appointments of chief diversity officers at institutions of higher education have grown. It is not uncommon if you do a quick Google search that you'll yield a number of job opportunities that are seeking a chief diversity officer, not only in higher education, but in healthcare, and in the corporate worlds as well. And oftentimes a person is hired in that position is the first in this newly created role. So that even in itself, for some, could show a commitment and dedication, or it could show a challenge and a concern for someone being the first in a role. When we talk about, you look at the mission statements of organization, and diversity is in that. So sometimes it's problematic when you have a first. And so most times those individuals are appointed in response to a crisis, such as a series of racial incidents on a college campus, or a concern with pay inequity in a senior level administrative position. And so oftentimes chief diversity officers are referred to as crisis managers. And even in that, there's a mix in the responses. So individuals in this role can be seen as symbolic because they were appointed during a time of crisis, whereas others can be seen as that institutional commitment. So if we're saying that we want a diverse working and learning environment, then we have to put the financial resources behind having someone in that role. And that's typically your chief diversity officer or your senior level administrator, who has to have a voice in the decisions that impact the institution. So when we look at the history of diversity and how this emergence of this chief diversity officer position was created, it's really important to realize that diversity in higher education moved from a single focus of increasing access to really an institutional-wide focus that really looks at the functions of the institution, from how we recruit our students, faculty, and staff, to how we retain them, to how we have dialogues and conversations about diversity. And so the growth of the role really builds upon that historical trend toward promoting diversity, equity, and inclusion in higher education. And this actually began with the creation of minority affairs roles, which began appearing at universities in the 70s and 80s. And so according to that research, during the 70s and 80s, universities were really experiencing increasing enrollment of minority students, predominantly African-American and Black students. So during that time, that idea of diversity really was focused on what we term compositional diversity, or the idea of increasing our student numbers based on race. And so as those enrollment trends increased and changed, combined with civil rights activism and other social movements, college and universities shifted from looking at diversity in terms of only race and gender, and really started creating offices that supported students. So you have offices of minority affairs, multicultural affairs, cultural centers. And predominantly that was focused on affirmative action in the beginning, and accessibility. And really at that level, the diversity officers were usually departmental level or middle level professionals in student services, rather than really being in that executive level, or in some instances within the president's or the chancellor's cabinets. And so then what happened is that we were enrolling students and bringing students to campus, increasing our numbers, saying that we have a diverse student population, but students were not happy. Students were at institutions in an environment that they were expressing to administrators that was unwelcoming, that they did not feel welcome, that they felt that they were a number for the institution and really did not have the support of the institution in addressing their needs, which ultimately would lead to a decline in retention. And when we talk about students enrollment, what we don't like to hear is decline in admissions or retention. And so what then happened is that Social media gave opportunities for students to be vocal, gave opportunities for individuals to share visual representation of their experiences. Since then institutions started hiring more diversity profession, and institutions really began to move them and elevate them to senior level positions, hence the emergence of the Chief Diversity Officer at an institution. And so when you look at the profile of Chief Diversity Officers and the expectations, really Chief Diversity Officers in the definition themselves are to be integral to the strategic direction of the institution and to the success of that institution. And so those in this role really have to have the ability to infuse diversity into all aspects of the university life, from, I think I stated before, as recruitment and retention to our community constituents. So what this graph shows is the typical profile of a Chief Diversity Officer in universities in the United States. Typically 57% of Chief Diversity Officers are female. 43% of those usually have been appointed in the last 2 years, and typically most of those 43% were appointed as a result of an incident that occurred on the college campus. And then, of course, more than half of the Chief Diversity Officers have a terminal degree, whether a PhD or a JD. And so historically, those in this role have often come from HR, or faculty positions, or a compliance equity-based focused background. So they're really narrow in their scope. And so, but now when you have conversations and even looking at the University of Missouri system and the Chief Diversity Officers in those roles, we really are coming from very different perspectives. And so for me, I came into this role, as I stated, from academic affairs, but my background is counseling. And my background has been counseling at-risk youth, crisis management, and support groups. And so when you're looking at the profile of a Chief Diversity Officer and looking at possibly appointing someone, let's say that's an internal appointment, we're all going to bring a variance of background in the space. But what is going to be consistent is the need for those Chief Diversity Officers to really be focused on the diversity needs of the campus. So regardless with the background, when you have those conversations, most of them are thought provokers on where the institution can go with the support of leadership in order to do that. So as I stated, most Chief Diversity Officers do not come into this work. Sometimes it finds them, and most times they're often appointed. And so because of that, there really needed to be professional standards for Chief Diversity Officers. And so the National Association of Diversity Officers in Higher Education, also referred to as NADIHE, really established professional practice for Chief Diversity Officers. And so they have 16 standards. I am not going to read those 16 standards, but there are a couple that I wanted to bring to the attention of the collective, because it also helps with the purpose of our discussion today. And so just a few of them on the next few slides, and I'll tell you why I felt that it was important to highlight them. So first, Chief Diversity Officers work to ensure that the elements of equity, diversity, and inclusion are embedded in our institutional mission, vision, and strategic plan. And so really the work that we do is framed by the standard, and that the work that and the efforts that we do for the university have to be based on the strategic goals and mission and vision of the institution. And so the second one that I wanted to highlight is that Chief Diversity Officers must work with senior campus administrators and others as well to really look at some of our institutional policies. This is a huge one as we look at structural barriers. And so what we know is that institutions of higher education were established in environments that limited access to education, to employment, based on race, gender, and religion. And so this is evident even if you look at the early creations of our historically Black colleges and universities and those missions. And so when we talk about attracting diverse students and diverse faculty and staff to our institution, but we have barriers in place that limit their access and their success. And so it's really important that if we want true institutional change, then we have to remove those structural barriers. For example, our policies as it relates to promotion. We say we have policies in place in order to retain our best personnel, but sometimes those policies are arbitrary. And so it's really not clear for someone who comes into an institution, if they come in, let's say, as an office support staff and aspire to be a chief diversity officer. Sometimes we don't create a clear pathway of how you can move from one level to the other. And often those are embedded in those barriers to access. So it's really important to recognize that as at institutions, we do have structural barriers that we need to change and remove in order for people to be successful. And so if you hear me say anything or nothing at all, if you remember anything from this presentation, is I'm going to always say collaboration. Collaboration across the institution. I cannot stress that enough. I tell individuals who are thinking about creating diversity committees, creating chief diversity officers, from the senior leadership down, if you don't put that commitment and stress the importance of shared governance in this space, then you're setting your person who will occupy the space up for failure. It is very difficult to walk up a mountain when the boulders and rocks are being thrown at you and you're dodging without someone saying, let me tell you another way to go around the mountain and we can go collectively together. So it's really important in this space. Okay, and so then the next one is that from the professional standards that chief diversity officers really have to work to ensure that their institutions have campus climate assessments or surveys. It's important to understand that in this work that you do is if you don't have a pulse of your campus, then you're creating initiatives that may not be in line with the needs of where the campus is going. So it's really important to do periodic campus climate surveys. I think the last statistics I read said that campus really should do this every 4 to 5 years because it's an ever-changing space that we're in. And what's also important is not only do you have a pulse of your campus, but it also provides the data and the metrics that you need in order to look at strategies and actions that really can enhance or improve an area of concern. So if I don't know that there's a concern with accessibility in our Millennium Student Center and no one shares that, how do I have a conversation with our facilities about making sure that the doors are equipped and accessible for our students? And so it's really important to have those conversations, to have that data, because then when you're having conversations about funding, you have the data to support the need. There we go. And so just the final two from this, and then we'll move on, is that it's really important, and this will come up also in some later slides, is the ability for chief diversity officers and diversity office to really address hate and bias incidents when they occur. And the reason I say that is because according to the Anti-Defamation League, college campuses are some of the most common settings for hate and bias incidents to occur. And sometimes the perpetrators of these incidents can be our own students, our own faculty, our own staff, in addition to individuals from outside of the institution. So it's really important in this space that we foster a culture where open, honest, and respectful interactions are our expectation, not our exception. And so just to give an example, late last semester, There were students that have brought some concerns in regards to visitors to campus and their interactions with our students, particularly our LGBTQ plus students. And so it's really important when you think about who is responsible and how an institution responds to this incident, is that you have to bring the appropriate individuals together in order to collectively respond. It should not be a one office or one unit, because there are so many aspects that go into that, from our communication team to our student affairs to even our counseling services, and bringing that collective together. You'll see at institutions that they have bias incident reporting protocols and a team that really goes in and addresses those concerns when they do arise. And then the final one, and then we're going to move away from the professional standards, is about accountability. That your Chief Diversity Office should hold the institution accountable for advancing your equity, diversity, and inclusion work. CDOs have the responsibility and the authority to ensure that the accountability for DEI, which is diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts, are really integrated throughout the entire institution. And so it's really important when you evaluate institutional change that you're really holding the institution accountable. So if we say that we're going to be responsive to the needs of retaining our students, then we have to put the resources behind retention efforts and what that looks like for the campus. So, thank you. Are we good, Leanne? Okay, good. So why is the role of the Office of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion more relevant than ever right now in our cultural context? And so what I say is there are several reasons. And so the next few slides, I'll just give my reasons as to why this office and this role is important. And I'll start with COVID. So as I stated early, Chief Diversity Officers really are typically good at crisis management. But for those of us in higher education, right now we're experiencing, actually for the last few months, a tremendous amount of stress because we're in an unprecedented space, right? Seemingly overnight, higher education in the world in which we live was plummeted into uncertainty. And a lack of a better phrase, chaos brought on from COVID. COVID really has changed our existence in higher education. It also has challenged the ways of our typical ways of doing things. We had to pivot from what was comfortable for us in order for our institutions to survive and strive. We had to utilize our collective voices and reason and really to respond to COVID-19 and what that brings to our faculty and to our students, from resilient course designs, moving courses online, to hotspots, to realizing the technological inequities that our students face, to food insecurity, to housing insecurity, and to our decreasing enrollment numbers because of COVID. But on the other side of that is I would stress that COVID also gave us an opportunity to reimagine and re-envision our work in this virtual space, such as today, having this conversation. And so I would argue that is why Chief Diversity Officers and Diversity Officers are needed. We must continue to engage leaders in action to look at policies and procedures that really perpetrate systemic racism. And I can't say it as any plainly as that. And in order to do that, we really have to have the insight and the knowledge, and we have to point out what works and what does not work, and show that commitment from the institution. So a second reason, and probably a huge, large reason for this work is societal concerns and the importance of listening with action. And I say this because the images speak volumes. When I came into this role before becoming Vice Chancellor in July, in June, we were scheduling the virtual conversation. But not only were we scheduling the virtual conversation, we were all in the office sitting in spaces where I think, as I think about it, I think the virtual conversation, although it did wonders for the campus, I think it also impacted us greatly in this space. Instances of police brutality really have motivated students, faculty, and staff to really call on institutions of higher education to take action and to effectively address racial injustices on their respective campuses and in the greater society. And even in preparation for the incident, my office knows and others know that I am married to a police officer, right? And so just the conversations of being who we are in the space as a Black woman, as a Black male, who's also a police officer, but he's a Black male first. And so it's really important for us to advocate and be a community for others in this time, and in this time of crisis, in this time of reconciliation, and this time of moving forward, and to be active in speaking for voices and representing voices of individuals who have been marginalized, who look for us and look for institutions of higher education to be their voice of reason, to be an open space for them to just share and be accountable to taking the actions that's needed for them to move forward. And so, as I stated before, really even in the wake of the deaths of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, and others, we really were responsive in not only just having a statement, expressing our collective outrage, but really also in how we shaped that first virtual gathering for racial unity. And that gathering, we felt, because we had a lot of different ideas of how we wanted to do it, but we really realized that the focus of that conversation should be the campus, that we needed to hear our collective voices, not bring someone from the outside in to speak for us, but really allow us to speak for ourselves. And so it was really important, even in having it open to faculty, staff, and students. Student involvement also had the opportunity to have conversations with students. But we realized through Ferguson, through the protests, through the conversations, is that our young students are really leading the way, and our ways of thinking no longer fit the expectations and what they need from us as institutions, especially in this dual pandemic that we find ourselves in. So the reason I put this word cloud, when we were creating the virtual gathering, we had an anonymous survey just asking the campus, how did they feel? And so based on just the common things and the words that we would hear, this word cloud was created. And you can see that there are things in there from injustice to better to systemic. But really what was most important for us is, if you just take a moment to look at it, the three top words were people, white, and change, right? And so sometimes even I come back to this, and why this is really important in the work that we do is that it shows the work that we have accomplished, but it also shows how much more work we still have to do. And so it's a collective effort from our office, from the professional development opportunities to the conversations, to bringing individuals in and hearing their collective voices and putting them in spaces where they can share that with others to really implement change for the institution. So all of that is important. And I end with this slide with this quote, is that what came out of this virtual gathering is we can no longer sit quietly against and allow violence against communities of color. It's of crucial importance for us in higher education to take a stand in solidarity with the communities that we serve. And so that is important and why it's relevant more now than ever for those offices. And I always follow up with that when someone says, well, how do we do it? And I say the first thing is open dialogue. And this is what was represented by our conversations in June. And then the next part of that is why the office is important is the idea of the importance of language. as we state, we really are not just simply celebrating and appreciating diversity. We really are trying to build an inclusive community where equity is one of the most important values of the institution. So what that means is we have to recognize and respect individual differences. And so, especially as we look at racial justice, and I just included just some things and some areas and some conversations in our office as we look at people of color. And the preferred term is now BIPOC, which is Black, Indigenous, and people of color. So those that are, it's a preferred term when you talk about ethnicities and races outside of white. To our pronouns and the importance of realizing that asking someone their pronouns and not assuming, and the privilege that we have in others not assuming what our pronoun is that we're showing a mutual respect for gender identity. And so it's important in this space when you see the she, her, hers, and you're not sure what that is, that it's acceptable to ask the question, and it's acceptable to show the respect by asking individuals what their pronouns are. Because sometimes it can be oppressive and hurtful when we don't. And so that's really important as well. Okay. And so when you look at diversity offices and diversity work historically and where it is, really institutions are moving towards inclusive excellence. And what inclusive excellence is really, it's a framework, and it's designed to help campuses integrate diversity and equity efforts into the very core of who they are, from their access and success of students to the program, to how they engage with the community and what that looks like. And so it's really important for myself in this role and for our office really to build on that momentum to drive UMSL's inclusive excellence mission and vision. It's part of our strategic plan, and really we're responsible for the oversight of that. Because ultimately, when you look at inclusive excellence and you look at these areas, it really is in our institutional strategy and our strategic goals of the institution to make sure that when we say that we move towards inclusive excellence, that it's represented in the various aspects of the institution. I'm gonna skip that one.
Yeah, Tanisha, I was just wondering, I didn't count the slides this time, but we're like at 12 o'clock.
Yep, I saw that too. And so
I don't want to rush you, but I see questions coming in, and I pre-submitted one, so I don't want to cut you short.
Oh, no, that's okay. I think I said when you practice it, you're like, oh, I'm afraid that I'm going to go under. But then when you have the conversation, you realize that there is a lot. So I'm going to move past this one and really just talk about the challenges and then open up the Q&A. And so really, when you look at the challenges, we know that there remains much work to be done. In different aspects, from our recruitment to our professional development to really generally a welcoming and equitable campus. And so what I say to individuals is that I am fortunate and happy that my conversation happened after the polarization of the political realm, and so that we can have these conversations in a different space. And so, but one of that challenges is really a balance of your allegiance to your institution, to your own personal beliefs, and to those that you represent. And so it was very difficult and very challenging, even in our conversation. There was an executive order from the president that really was, had the institutions looking at the professional development training. So knowing the work that went into that, and then someone questioning that work sometimes is very difficult and takes you aback. And so we were experiencing that over the last few months. And then of course, the lack of resources for anyone in the space. And we say this is not something that's uncommon even in different areas, but really in order for your chief diversity officers and your diversity office to be successful, the resources have to be there. And that's not necessarily just financial resources, but human capital is what I say we have a lot of right now. And so the ability to work with others and collaborate is really important in this space. And so just in conclusion, so Do institutions of higher education need diversity offices? Absolutely. Because the commitment to diversity, of course, is the responsibility of everyone. But I believe that the chief diversity officer can be the facilitator of those conversations, and the diversity office can be the facilitator of those conversations. But I also caution individuals when you are looking at diversity officers is that, yes, we come in sometimes when there's a crisis, but we're more than that. And so sometimes when you're in the space, we get calls from units that say, I want to do this, this, and this. And it's like, yes. But our focus, of course, we can come in and address the concern or the equity concern, but also there is so much more that our offices do that I don't want us to be reduced to only coming in when crises occur. Okay. And then, of course, collaboration and then resource. And then I'll end in conclusion, we're also more than just an advocate. Really, as I'm in the preparation stage for the university's Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. celebration, we always go back to injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. And so it's really important for college campuses to really see diversity as a critical matter for higher education. It's not and or, but always. It should be infused in all the work that we do. But I also tell individuals that this is a marathon, it's not a sprint. If it was, I could snap our fingers and the world would be the manner in which we want it to be. But we realize that it takes time to break down and change a lot of institutional policy, but that doesn't mean that you stop. You just continue to go at it. And my final quote is that the work takes time. And to undo the systems against our students, we really need to tear down the foundation. I think it's important in that space that your chief diversity officer and your diversity office is allowed the space to do that. There you go.
Thank you so much, Tanisha. That was a fantastic presentation, and I've already received some text messages here. Can we have the PowerPoint and not just the recording? And that's a question for you. If you could make that PowerPoint presentation available for our German listeners and visitors here today. And then I also wanted to say you have made me almost jobless here because I've counted it now. I've already crossed out 3 pre-submitted questions, namely the ones about the job profile, the typical day of a diversity officer. And then thanks to your one slide, I now know how to pronounce your organization for, like the US Organization for Diversity Officers. It's NADAHO, right? Is that right?
NADAHE.
NADAHE.
Yeah.
NADAHE. So all Germans listening here today, so try to roll your tongue and to practice that nicely. So before we dive into the Q&A, we have about half an hour. So I've seen questions are coming in. I wanted to frame this discussion also a little bit and give it some context, since this is a trans-Atlantic discussion. And the reason, Tanisha, you and I talked before we launched the series about the fact that the history of having diversity officers is totally different than the history of similar offices and officers in Germany. So what we call in German Gleichstellungsbeauftragte, so that's for our German listeners, that is a loose translation of what you're doing, but you had some wonderful slides about the history and shed some light on one of the questions that was also pre-submitted. So where is the history? Why is it so much about minority students? Why is it not about international so much? And usually I would say prior to our series here, well, the history of the United States is different. The needs were different and they were addressed earlier. And you had a wonderful slide about the responses of like the Black Lives Matter movement around the globe. And also, again, that is what triggered also the discussion with our friends in Stuttgart. And I don't know, I haven't seen all the participants' names today, but sometimes we have Black and Brown Berlin here in our discussion. And all these organizations are looking at the United States from an angle saying, you have those offices, you have a framework, whereas you concluded with there is so much to do, and there definitely is. So I'd say I don't take away time here. I'd say we'd focus on the questions that came in, and then I had some additional ones that were pre-submitted, and I'd like to take the ones like as they were submitted in the same order. The first one it's somebody from Canada asking, will there be a men or gender studies that will be included, as not all men access power the same way, taking intersectionality into account?
Right, and I think we've moved away. So if you look at different diversity offices on campus, and let's look at Mizzou's versus ours, their gender studies and the reframing of that is in response to that, because it is so much more. And it also has that historical background where we talked about diversity was really race and gender focused. I think even in the early conversations of women and gender studies, they fit the context when they were created, but now the conversation is switching. And so you'll hear intersectionality and the importance of the different identities that we bring in our space. And so it's important even to look at how we name something. So our gender, we were women in gender studies, but we're moving from gender to gender studies and really bringing in those collective voices, even from our LGBTQ plus perspectives into that. And so there have been intentional conversations for the need to even look at how we frame some of our degree programs in our departments to be more responsive to our campus context and our needs. So yes.
Great, thank you. So next question from an anonymous attendee here is, as the CDO, the Chief Diversity Officer, do you work closely with human resources to help ensure there is diverse representation on staff? And to make sure, like staff, I saw several other questions coming in here. We differentiate between staff and faculty. Maybe if you could speak to that as well to make that terminology clear.
Yes. And so the response to that is the previous director in this position had some conversations and some processes with human resources. What was important for me in this role, as well as for others, is really to be more intentional in those conversations. So for example, right now, our office, as well as human resources and the provost office, were very intentional in looking at our search processes. And so this semester, we're really piloting our Dean of the College of Business search as a collective effort, from the conversations and the training about implicit bias to the search committee, which we haven't done that before, and the importance of bringing all of our office together to move that from the pool certification to the training to making sure there is diverse representation in the committee, to make sure there's diverse representation in the sessions and the individuals, and really even in asking the questions of the candidates that when we talk about diversity, what is your definition and what you will do? So we have been more intentional in those conversations, working with human resources, even on some very difficult conversation as we look at, I think I expressed earlier, budget concerns and making sure that we're equitable in our process, even when we're looking at laying off positions. So yes.
Well, thank you for that feedback. And from a user standpoint and being a staff member here on campus, I'd say, and an international, I mean, as I mentioned earlier, I've been with UMSL for 4 years. This has been my first American university that I've been working at, that I've worked at. And I've served on several committees, and every single time your office is present, and not just as like, well, they also get a seat, but in a very active role that has always impressed me. And in comparison to other places, and not exclusively to Germany, since we're doing this in a German-American context here, but also to other places. And I think that speaks for the success and the need that the institution has. So that's just my personal feedback. And then I'll move to the next question here from Laura or Laura. So is HR diverse? Are various faculties diverse? What is the makeup? How many non-white staff are tenured? I guess how many non-white faculty members in that case, I guess, are tenured professors versus their white counterparts? Are there systems in place or being used to ensure non-white professors become tenured professors, in particular for Black men and women professors?
Okay.
That's a great.
That's a great question.
Big, but a question from my perspective, and I think that's might be a question that many people have also across the Atlantic here.
Right. And what's so interesting is that every November 2nd, the university does a census. And so we were just looking at the census numbers. And so we've made strides, but we recognize very quickly that we as an institution have work to do. And so in the conversations with our office and the provost, who was also new in her role, is really even looking at our tenure and promotion processes. Mm-hmm. And really, as I stated, Dr. Marlowe, looking at implicit bias even in the tenure and promotion process, and be very intentional in having what does it look like? What does service look like for, so let's say we have faculty members that really are doing a great job with some of our student organizations, or let's say our Associated Black Collegians organization. How is that represented when you look at service to a committee, sometimes that is very research focused when you look at tenure and promotion? So we are having those conversations. We also recognize that there is work to do. So I would be remiss if I would say we're doing great. We're super, no, I think part of this role and part of this responsibility is acknowledging when we have not done a very good job with recruiting and retaining of faculty and staff of color. Because our students let us know when they come to the institution, if they don't feel welcome because they don't see individuals that look like them, then we're unable to retain those students. So really we're having conversation this last set of when we were able to hire faculty members, and the importance of conversations about cluster hires, which a number of our new faculty that are coming in for the fall were really brought in with that inclusive excellence framework of bringing faculty members in to represent areas that we were struggling with. Mm-hmm. So for example, our Black studies, and so what that looks like. So we have made strides, but there is still work to do. And so our numbers are not representative of our student body.
Mm-hmm. Wow. Yeah, I'm just thinking all the hiring processes and how, well, that's a big task. The next question comes from Miriam Georget, here from UMSO. Could you please provide examples of incidents, and the actions taken to address them? And I had the same question, or a similar question actually. Can you provide practical examples of challenges? And you mentioned like your role as a crisis manager before. So I guess the pre-submitted community here had similar thoughts.
So I think for me, I came into this role from that equity piece, the investigation of areas of concern. So there was an incident where there were concerns with positive working and learning environment. And so that involved conversation, not only with the person who brought it forward, but those that worked in the unit. And so what I realized is that we sometimes do ourselves a disservice when we don't provide the space for people to be able to just share their experiences. And so it was really important to me in that space to allow for that voice to be heard, to provide that space. And then the next part of that was going back to the department and sharing what those concerns are and the necessary actions that needed to be taken. And sometimes those necessary actions are removing individuals from positions. And so in that particular case, that was an action, not only providing the space, providing the resources, looking at the promotion practices of the department, but also looking at the management in that department and saying, this person is not contributing to a positive work environment, and allowing the department to do the next steps with human resources as it relates to individuals in that space. But we don't know that if we don't provide the space for individuals to come forward.
Next question also from Laura. If the institution is serious about having CDOs on board, why is there a lack of resources? When institutions are serious, they usually have the money, we wished, and other resources to realize the vision. But I'd still wanted to make sure we take that important question.
Right, and I think for me, even when I came into the interim role after the previous director retired, and then the opportunity to become the Vice Chancellor was presented, my question before saying yes was, will we have the resources available in order for us to be successful? And so that was a commitment from the Chancellor. That sometimes does not happen. And so it's really important that you don't rush this process. It's like, oh, we have a crisis, the students are protesting. We take our Mizzou sister campus as an example of what happens when you are slow to action and then you rush the action. That was a clear case of what we don't want to happen here at the university. But I would not be in this position if I did not have the support from the Chancellor in providing the resources. And sometimes that is being allowed to be a part of the decision-making process. And I think before, when you look at this office, is that was a concern, that the office was not involved in the decision-making process. And so it's been very intentional that our office is there. From the communications that go out to looking at our policies. And so that's really important. And then the manpower. And so, when we talk about the cultural center and even talk about some changes that are occurring on the campus, I am one that we're not going to rush to just do it. You have to have the resources available for it. Otherwise, we set ourselves up for failure. And so I've been vocal about that to the Chancellor. And I appreciate the Chancellor because she was committed to making sure that we have the resources that we need to move forward.
Yeah, and if I may add that, Tanisha, on behalf of our university here and for our listeners, wherever they listen or watch us right now, for our participants here, UMSL, as many institutions across the United States right now, and possibly also elsewhere, we have been really affected by the COVID-19 crisis, also financially. That means not like my office, for example, international, like our UMSL Global office, everybody is financially impacted. So as much as there is that understanding there, what we actually need even more right now, we have to take our steps one after the other and to be very cautious about our resources and use them in a smart way. In a good way, on the good side is what you already what you have already highlighted with your COVID-19 slide. I think by with the side effect of COVID-19, that everybody is now so much more tech savvy, more open to this virtual format. We're also saving a lot of costs for in-person meetings. We reach a much broader audience also across the pond here, the big pond. So those are all good side effects. I'd like to use the last 10 minutes maybe for a few questions from our German audiences that were pre-submitted. And you gently hit on some of them before mentioning that you are happy that your presentation happens after the elections. And I know that your predecessors, the previous speakers have heat on the elections before. And the question I got was really interesting, I thought. Over the past 2 to 3 years, maybe 4 years, it has been challenging to think progress for the United States. So especially in regard to diversity and inclusion, do you see change and hope?
Absolutely. And I think even, and I was thinking about this even in preparing for the presentation, I think our default is to talk about race and gender. But diversity and inclusion is so much more. And even in our conversation that we had when we were having a conversation about the international perspective, and it's really important that when we have the conversation, yes, we focus on race because we can see that, but I'm hopeful because we've had other conversations. We have a very active student organization as it relates to our needs of students, our Able Disabled Partnership, which led to an access and advocacy council, which is really student focused, and they are very vocal on the needs of that. And why I say that's important is because when we think about accessibility, what COVID also taught us is that a lot of our students were having technological inequities as well. So it's really important, and then to see that from a different perspective and a different lens. So I am hopeful. And in spite of, we have made tremendous change, in spite of an executive order to question our professional development, we've continued those professional development conversations. And so it's someone will say, well, you're teaching the United States and individuals to hate people. No, that's not the case. It really is looking at your own personal beliefs and biases and really being open to the conversation. It's bringing others in the conversation. So yes, I'm hopeful. Yes, I'm optimistic. I believe that the work that we do at the institution is valuable. Because it's every part of us. Even the invitation to have this conversation, this is new. So when we talk about hopeful, this conversation didn't happen before when we were on campus, when we were in a different space. And so, yes, I'm hopeful and optimistic because we're being creative even in our conversations and even in our actions. We're doing things in spaces that we didn't think were possible, but they are possible. And we've moved that, when you move that barrier of fear of the unknown, we've been able to accomplish some great things.
Thank you. So here's another rather complex but very interesting question that came in from one of our university partners in Germany. It says, diversity offices have seen lots of demand on German campuses, especially since over the past 10 years. But so obviously with a much younger history and different motivation and immediate needs. You have been in your field for many years, as we guess. We heard that today, actually. What type of recommendations would you have for younger offices in this field? What would be your top 3 to 4 things to keep in mind for us as we build our offices?
Okay, 3 to 4 things. That was good. I think in order to answer that question, I think the top thing I would say first is the importance of the climate survey. Mm-hmm. Climate survey to your students, faculty, and staff, even your alums and community partners, because what that information will yield will determine the next steps. So I think it's beneficial to know the needs of your campus by asking them than assuming. Because it really then will direct the actions and initiatives. My second would be always professional development training opportunities. Mm-hmm. We are doing a really good job, and we're really bringing in others to bring that student focus in as well in those conversations. So that would be my second. My third is those open dialogue conversation series, because it shows a sense of community, it shows a dedication. And then my fourth one is the importance of the senior leadership in supporting any action and initiative, because it's an institutional commitment, and I don't think anything stresses more importantly that institutional commitment than that statement from the leadership of the campus as to why it's important in the work that we do. Why this diversity work, why a chief diversity officer in office is important for the institution. And, I think sometimes individuals are, I don't know, maybe afraid of the word diversity, but it's inclusion, it's equity. You look at faculty members, assistant professors in a specific department. Are there gender inequities in pay? That's part of the office. You look at when you're bringing individuals to campus to have a conversation, let's say about naming a building. And if we use the Mizzou example, a Thomas Jefferson statue, who's invited to that conversation? So it's so much more, but it also has to be an institutional commitment. It has to be the leadership supporting the initiatives of a young office. And the ability, because I think it opens up the campus to be more collaborative, because there is a lot of great work that occurs on college campuses. I think this office helps to facilitate that information. And really, if I see that a faculty member is doing research in this unit, or we see that in the College of Nursing, they have a diversity equity council that they are creating, or you have one in the College of Education that's been there for a while. You connect two, so it's not a reinventing of the wheel, it's looking at the needs of the unit and using others to be a part of that conversation.
Nita, we're down to, I have 18 more questions.
Okay, sorry.
No, it's hard to pick here. I'll be quick. So the two questions I would pick from this pre-submitted ones is, and that was actually one from from our younger audiences in Germany, from a student. Has the death of George Floyd impacted your work and your mission directly? If so, how? And I'm just guessing that this is maybe asking for the temperature on campus, and I'm just guessing. I don't want to speak for the one who submitted that.
I think the conversations that took place during that time and continue to take place now just illustrate and highlight just how important the continued conversation is. I think the deaths and the conversation impacted us all, but they impacted us in different manners. And I think we have to be open to recognizing that we come into a space and we may have different perspectives on the situation, but how great we can move as a campus forward if we come together and respectfully share those opinions. But yes, I think it personally impacted everyone in our office. And I think it also just reignites the reason why we continue to do the work, because the work can get tired. I think on that slide, it says our previous director was here for 20 plus years. Most chief diversity officers don't stay in their roles more than 5 or 6 years, because it can become overwhelming.
Oh, interesting. I didn't know that either. So I would say, so I'll summarize a few here, no longer for answering today, but actually this will be a good segue to conclude our speaker series, because what it shows is that we have, I had several more questions about the concrete feedback to your discussion series here. And then because people spotted it online, and then I got questions like, hey, can we tap in? There is the speaker series going on, and as I understood it, it was more for giving our campus community first the chance to have this I don't want to call it safe space discussions, but it was a campus focused discussion series. And I do know from students, faculty, friends, and staff, and from my own experience, how important and how helpful these events have been in order to all carry us through with all the burden in our hearts and on our souls going through those past months on top of COVID and the political situation in this country. So those helped a lot. I think with the number of questions we got, this also speaks for our transatlantic speaker series here. With that, I want to thank you today, Dr. Stevens, for a very, very insightful presentation. And I think ignition for more discussions. So on behalf of our Stuttgart team and also of AMSL, thank you very much, Tanisha. And with this actually concludes our transatlantic discussions on race and racism for the season, I would say. I would like to thank all of our speakers, our sponsors again, and very, very much our participants for their support, for their great questions, because I feel discussions like this live from the questions and the answers from the discussions. So events like those live from those discussions, I should rather say. I'd say thank you, everyone, and make sure to stay safe, always committed to tolerance and peace, and be in compliance with Tanisha has presented today. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I've enjoyed it. Thank you.
Thanks.